Welcome to the Sisterhood of Sweat. I am here today with Dr. Caroline Leaf. Dr. Caroline Leaf is a communication pathologist and cognitive neuroscientist with a master's and Ph.D. in communication pathology and a BSc Logopaedics, specializing in cognitive and metacognitive neuropsychology. Since the early 1980s, she has researched the mind-brain connection, the nature of mental health, and the formation of memory. She was one of the first in her field to study how the brain can change, neuroplasticity, with directed mind input. During her years in clinical practice and work with thousands of underprivileged teachers and students in her home country of South Africa and in the USA, she developed her theory called the geodesic information processing theory of how we think, build memory, and learn into tools and processes that have transformed the lives of hundreds of thousands of individuals with traumatic brain injury and chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So TBI and CTE, if you've heard the abbreviations. Learning disabilities, ADD, ADHD, autism, dementias, and mental health issues like anxiety and depression. She has helped hundreds of thousands of students and adults learn how to use their mind to detox and grow their brain to succeed in every area of their lives, including school, university, and the workplace. This episode was so power packed. You guys are going to want more. Make sure to take notes, and Dr. Caroline Leaf's book, Your Mental Mess. If you feel like a hot mess today, she can help you with organizing your thoughts, rewiring, editing toxic thoughts, and being able to stand back and be an observer of your triggers so that you can rewire the brain with positive psychology versus the negative. She really talks about the neuroscience today and gives us a lesson in neuroscience, but it's just amazing how much your mind rules everything else, and working on your mindset. It's so key for the Sisterhood of Sweat and just being an empowered woman as well as a healthy and fit woman, and just feeling overall like you're powerful. We talked about how getting that mental mess cleared up keeps you from feeling powerless into feeling more powerful, and how we really have more power than we realize. It was such an amazing episode today. We talked about freeing ourselves from perfectionism, which can cause anxiety and depression when we're not feeling enough or not feeling like we measure up, or perhaps like, what we feed our mind with, and the experiences around us and the things that have happened to us, they all go into the whole scheme of what is causing our processes. So if you're anxious, maybe, like we talked about how my mom was anxious and she had depression, but I was having such an epiphany when I read Dr. Caroline's book about how that was probably tied into some of her depression, as well as being taught, I think, that women weren't supposed to have a voice and they were supposed to be more submissive. And so I could look back and realize that a lot of my mom's anxiety came from perfectionism. Her mother was a teacher, and I remember thinking, boy, I really broke the mold, because I would, get into mischief. But my mom, I think the worst thing she ever did was after school, she was from brothers and sisters, or she had a family of four. My grandmother had four children, and the worst thing my mom did was not to go in the house she was supposed to go in. She pretended she forgot the key so she could play outside. So believe me, I really broke the mold. So I think a lot of perfectionism, a lot of being that teacher's child, was my mom was the expectations were so high. Of course, my mom was a valedictorian of her class. So you see where I'm going with that. And I love how Dr. Caroline draws all of these connections together to help us make sense so we can be aware of our mental mess so we can change our mental mess. This episode was so good today, you guys. You may have to put it on a rewind a few times. Without further ado, let's dive into this episode with the one, the only Dr. Caroline Leaf.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be with you.
Oh gosh. You guys, I have been following Dr. Caroline from afar ever since I had Dr. Will Cole on my show a couple of times. He's a big fan of yours. And
Yes, a
so
good friend.
I fell in love with your posts. So
Thank you.
many good posts on your Instagram, and
Thank you.
so good about dealing with our mental mess, our mindset. Your book I've been diving into, and I got to tell you, I have so many notes today, so we're just going to let this roll. So
Fantastic.
tell everybody a little bit about you and how um, you came to write your mental mess.
Absolutely. Well, this is my, I've written many, many books. This is like one of many, and this is my most recent. And I'm a cognitive neuroscientist and communication pathologist. And I've spent 38 years now researching the psychoneurobiological link, which is mind, brain, body link, which people talk about. And there's a lot of people that are aware of, but a lot of people don't fully understand the complexity and the power that we have over our body with our mind, and how what the mind and brain difference is. And I began in a very therapeutic sense working with people with traumatic brain injuries and Alzheimer's and autism and learning disabilities and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, that's damaged trauma from sports injuries and that kind of thing, and also extreme war trauma, sexual trauma, that kind of thing. Back in South Africa, I trained in the 80s when they didn't believe that the brain could change. So the going philosophy in the 80s was that the brain was different from the mind, which is correct, but that the brain couldn't change. And I remember in one of my neuroscience lectures challenging one of my professors saying, but that's impossible because life is always different. We're always experiencing different things. Are we changing? We growing? So the organ that our mind uses, it must also be changing. So they said to me, well, that's a ridiculous question, but if you want to research it, I said, okay, well, give me the worst kind of the most challenging situation. And they said, well, try it with traumatic brain injury. And people with traumatic brain injuries back in the 80s, there was very, very, very little research that was done on helping them and just about traumatic brain injury, because the going philosophy was, well, your brain is damaged, there's nothing you can do, so just teach the patient to compensate. And I did a TED talk on this, actually, on the ridiculous question of neuroplasticity, and basically some of the first neuroplasticity research in my field back in the late 80s, early 90s, showing that you can take someone who's got a traumatic brain injury, severe learning disabilities, and if you teach them to understand the mind and you directly change the mind, you can change the brain and the body. And I showed that even prior to the advent of the fMRI technology, which was early 90s, which showed how the brain can change, where we could see inside the brain, see it changing. Up until then, it was CT scans, and basically you couldn't really see the changes in the brain. So the big thing here is that we then, from the 90s onwards, it was, oh wow, the brain, the brain, the brain, and we learned so much about the brain, and the era of neuroscience really started dominating. And we're in a very neuroscience era now, but almost there's negative and positive. And the positive is that we know more about the brain, but the negative is that it's made us very neuroreductionistic. So mind and brain, instead of being seen as separate, have been subsumed into one. And that's unfortunate, because when you think your mind is your brain, you lose a lot of autonomy. And that's what we see over the past 40 years as this movement in these years that I've been involved. I've seen people going from recognizing I'm in this place because of what I'm going through, to thinking, oh, I have a disease. because anything to do with mind has been likened to cancer and diabetes, and that's not the true, it's not even the correct narrative. It's not a good scientific narrative. It has been disproven, and it's also led to a lot of problems in increasing basically mismanagement of mental health, in my opinion, because everything is labeled and diagnosed, and
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of put in, and it's almost like you have to have a disease label to validate what you're going through. Meanwhile, nothing, you should never be invalidated. Whatever you're going through is very real. No one can understand your experience, and your narrative and your story should be honored. You should be able to process it and talk about it, not just have it boxed into a label and shoved aside and kind of told that, well, that's who you are, because you can't be depression, you can't be anxiety. Those are not it's. They are basically warning signals. They are
Yeah,
responses to
like the
underlying causes.
symptoms.
Yeah, they symptoms of underlying causes. So my research over the years has been to try and understand the mind brain connection, and what does it mean if you experience life. What does it do? So an experience of life is experienced through your mind, and then what happens next is it's built into your brain. How does it build into your brain, and what control do you have over it, and what are thoughts, and what are memories, and what are emotions? So that's been my field of study. Done years and years and years and years of research, 25 years of clinical practice, and in that process I've developed systems that based on very solid scientific theories on how to basically get your mind to drive the neuroplasticity of your brain, and therefore drive your body, because it's mind, brain, body, psychoneurobiology. And what is that root, and what is the feedback loop, and what kind of autonomy do we have? And I'm happy to tell you that you can learn to control your mind, because you are your mind. And so you can use your wise mind to control your messy mind. And as you're doing that, you are rewiring your brain. You're building thoughts into your brain, and thoughts are made of memories, and you can control that process. And whatever's going on in your mind will go on in your brain, and whatever happens in your brain will influence your body. If you understand that root, you are so much more empowered to deal with the day to day stuff of life, and the big stuff, the traumas, and just the day to day stuff.
And I just have to say, as a health and fitness enthusiast and just a women's health expert in general, I have learned so much about if I want to help my client, we can't do it just eating leafy greens and exercising. We always have to go to the root cause and go to the beginning and work on our mindsets. And how can, people have been through such a rough time right now where there's so much uncertainty, so much fear, so much anxiety, and some people feel angry. How can we help them tune into their symptoms so they can go back and reset the mental mindset that makes them feel more powerful instead of powerless?
Exactly. Very good question. Well, the same way that when you help someone work through an exercise program, they know that they're not going to get fit overnight. I mean, it's so logical. We all understand that it takes time to get into a healthy fitness program and build your muscles and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to the mind, we haven't been trained enough in the mind. It's just one of those areas that has been so neglected. So what people do is they say, okay, there's stress management, meditate, and do breathing exercises and go to yoga and work out, which are all excellent things. But those are only dealing with the body. And you quite rightly said that you have to get into the mindset as well. So we can't eliminate mind, because basically mind drives everything. Mind is your engine room. If you think of it like this, the difference between you and I talking, and the listeners and viewers, and a dead person is our mind. Someone who's dead doesn't have a mind. So the mind is the operating force of that enables us to function, enables our brain and our body. It gives life to the brain and the body. So it's literally a life force. And people don't think of it like that, but think of your mind as being your life force, your ability to experience life. The fact that you can actually sit and listen to this podcast, that they can come to you and learn how to empower their bodies to be able to be healthier, etc., etc. That is, the mind is the decision to come to you, to follow your program. Your mind's driving all of that. In fact, your mind is driving the effectiveness of the workout. If your mindset, and you've said this a few times now, if your mind, you may not know the statistic, but if your mind is not in the workout, you can lose up to 80 to 90% of the workout. Your DNA won't respond
You're
in the
not
same way.
focused.
Yeah, if you exactly. So if you're just going to get the workout over and done with, I mean, just recently, my husband and I work out all the time, and Orange Theory in the gym and hot yoga and everything. And we were at the gym early the other morning. I don't like going early mornings. I'm an afternoon, evening workout person. But I went early morning, and someone commented, "Oh, you're here early to get your workout done, over and done with." And immediately my reaction was, no, I don't ever do a workout to get it over and done with. I go into it fully immersed in the experience, because if I just go in with that mindset, my DNA's changed. My mind has actually changed the energy waves in my brain. My entire body would have changed down to the level of my telomeres in my DNA, and I will not get the same benefit out of that workout. I'll lose up to 80% of the benefit. And most people don't realize that. You can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, but you 3 minutes without oxygen, but you cannot even go 3 seconds without your mind working. So your mind is what you use now to listen to this, to do your workout, to eat, to get dressed, to have a relationship, to go to sleep. Your mind never stops. So if we don't understand the driving force behind who we are as humans and how it works, that's then going to be why we keep landing up in a mental mess. So you can't switch your mind off when you're alive. So my whole argument is, if you can't switch it off, how do you make it work properly? And that's really what my work has boiled down to. I still do all the therapeutic side. I don't practice anymore, but I still develop that side. But in the book, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, and my podcasts and my Instagram page, is to help people to live with their mind and to manage that mindset. So that's very foremost in how do you deal with this pandemic mess. So then the other thing to understand is that if my mind is this force, what is my brain? So I've got some little models over here. I just want to pick them up. I've got a model of the brain here. So our brain, you're not your brain. This is the key thing. You are not your brain. You drive your brain. Dead, this brain does nothing. But with you alive right now at 400 billion actions per second, you with your mind are experiencing what I'm saying on an electromagnetic and quantum level and gravitational fields and all this fancy physics is how you are actually receiving all the sound waves and the light waves and all that stuff. You're psychologically, you're listening and you're thinking, feeling, and choosing in cycles. And all this is happening in cycles of 400 billion actions per second. So, in other words, there's this mass of stimulation from this experience of this conversation that you are in. So, you're in this environment, there's this conversation, and all of this conversation is being received electromagnetically and gravitational fields and all that stuff, and process, think, feel, choose. And that's all happening external and around the brain and body. But then as soon as it's received, it's processed through the brain. So, it's kind of like grabbed by the mind and then pushed through the brain. And it's the relationship between the mind and the brain where the magic happens. And so as soon as this information is pushed through the brain in these fields, through your think, feel, choose, etc., the brain responds on an electromagnetic, chemical, and neurochemical level and genetic level. And my words are converted into little protein branches, well, branches made of protein, and my words and all the visuals become little vibrations. And here's a little what I'm talking about. You literally build thoughts which look like trees into your brain. So every single experience you have from the time you wake up till the time you go to sleep, from a certain point in the womb to the age that you're at today, has been converted by your mind through your brain into little protein trees inside of your brain. And in gravitational fields around your mind, in your mind area. So around you and through you, you've got these fields. If you watch a podcast and you see the little lines going that's kind of a way of visualizing the thought inside the mind. So think of
Brain
it like this.
waves.
Waves, yeah, it's literally waves in the mind, protein trees in the brain, vibrations inside the protein trees, but an actual physical protein tree. And then it also, as soon as that happens, the brain sends an instruction to the rest of the cells of your brain and body, and the DNA also changes. So that's why we have somatic memory. That's why when people do things like trauma yoga, or they do movement or certain poses, it's bringing up that memory, and you try and reprocess it. EMDR therapy is bringing it from the cells into the brain and back into the mind. It's kind of going that way around and pulling the trauma out or pulling the experience out. That's why when you recall something and you get that like dread in the pit of your stomach and your whole body, you'll find one moment you get triggered and the next minute you feel awful. That's the body memory, brain memory, and mind memory. But the memory is not just one memory. The memory is a whole lot inside of a tree. So let's say now COVID, bring this full circle back to your question. So this whole COVID, the whole pandemic issue, experience, there's the environment and there's COVID and everything it means to you as a person in your experience. So just to quickly come back to this tree, as we're talking now, everything I'm saying are the roots of the tree. This little tree has got a root system and branches. So the source of the tree is the source of the information. So what my words are in the roots, in root part. Your understanding or interpretation, how you see this information I'm giving you, is in the branches. So literally, you grab my words and grow the roots. At the same time, you're also growing the branches simultaneously, which is your interpretation, how you see it. That's our unique perception. And this then is how you show up, how you would then talk about this. So now here is the COVID experience. Now look at this as a toxic tree. So this is now a wiry tree. And I use these analogies because these thoughts literally look like trees in the brain, trees of wavy trees in the mind, and then they change the DNA. But it's easy to visualize. Now here's the root. So this is the source. So this is now everything about COVID, the isolation, the fear, the uncertainty, the financial implication, grief, whatever. Maybe you were sick, the damage to your body, all your experience over the last 15, 16 months of COVID. And as each thing has happened, you've interpreted. Another thing happens, you've interpreted. So over time, this is wired into your brain. So COVID experience is a protein tree inside your brain. It's waves in your mind, and it's in the DNA of your body. And so that's why when we think of it, the whole thing comes back. Now, this is basically a trauma, and it's a trauma experience. That's the root, that's the interpretation. So now, like any, if you have a weed in your garden, you can't eliminate it by just chopping the head off. You're going to have to pull the whole thing out. You have to find the root cause, which goes back to the beginning of the comment you made. You always tell your clients to find the root. It's totally accurate. You can't just medicate, which will just numb it's like chopping the head off. You can't just suppress because it doesn't go away. These are volcanic in nature. They're real. Think of the COVID virus. The COVID virus is made of protein. We all know we've heard that a million times. We've heard that the immune system responds by sending out T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes and macrophages, and that creates inflammation. And that is the body's fight response, protective response for survival. We can all get that. But did you know that if your actual experience of COVID is also a protein tree in the brain? So it's a different type of protein to the COVID protein, but it's also a protein-based structure with chemicals. So that's what people don't realize. Thoughts are real. Your experiences become real protein structures in the brain. Now
That's
we wired
amazing.
for this. This is survival. So if we have this is not survival. Anything that threatens our survival, the uncertainty, death, grief, finances, anything that's threatening your balance, your survival, is going to be built, is the toxic experience is going to be rejected by the brain. So on top of your mind seeing this as a problem, your brain also sees this as a problem, and it sends out the same response: T lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, macrophages, and we get inflammation here. The problem is if we don't manage this process, then this just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And now this has created tremendous imbalance in the mind and the body. So the body sends signals. You start getting maybe sicknesses or responses, just weaker or whatever, things, funny things going wrong, and
Yes.
constant adrenaline rushes. That's in your body. In your mind, you
Right.
are starting to get signals of depression, anxiety, frustration, anger, all those things. And those aren't illnesses, those aren't neuropsychiatric brain diseases. We have anxiety has tripled over the pandemic. It doesn't mean that we have more, that people have a sickness of anxiety. It's not a sickness, it's a response. It's totally understandable that it's tripled. I mean, it's a shocking experience that we've gone through, and it's changed our lives completely. So our anxiety is a very, very normal human response. And when it becomes extreme, that it's unmanageable, it's still not an illness. It just means that your mind is really battling. And because your mind moves through your brain, you've got this disruption in your brain, this disruption in your immune system. So the whole environment of your body has changed and become very vulnerable to illnesses and disease. And that's why maybe you're catching, flu, and you're just weaker, and you're finding it harder to concentrate. And all those are kind of the side effects of the trauma which is manifesting. So the anxiety, depression, etc., are warning signals saying, hey, we got to deal with this. So if you look at it like that, what we need to do is to answer your question. Now that's kind of the foundation. To answer your question directly is, what do you do? Well, we need to become thought detectives, literally. And the system I've developed to become a thought detective is a neurocycle, which is 38 years of research based on a theory, based on clinical experience, based on and I say that because people think, oh, 5 steps, oh, that's easy. It's 5 steps that are easy, but it's not a quick fix. It is a system of delivery where you train your mind systematically over time to change this. into this. And that does not happen overnight. It happens in cycles of 63 days. So it takes that time to recognize the whole, this is how I'm seeing this. These are my signals. This is why what I'm thinking. This is the root. Okay, let me change that. So that's a process of embracing and processing and reconceptualizing. It's a deconstructing and a reconstructing process. So the neurocycle is a system. It's like a delivery system, like Amazon. Amazon is very efficient at delivering everything and anything under the sun. The neurocycle is a delivery system. It's how you, using your wise mind, manage your messy mind to get to go from the messiness of the anxiety and depression, and not get scared of those, but see those as helpful signals, and then deconstructing down to, okay, this is really how the COVID has impacted me, or this is the trauma that I've been suppressing, and then going beyond that and saying, okay, this is what it is. Now, how do I fix it? So it's a slow process of daily deconstructing and reconstructing. And it takes about 21 days to identify most of the root or part of the root, and to reconstruct it into a healthier version where you don't, it's happened. You can't change that it's happened, but you can change how, you can change what's in you. You can't change what's happened to you. So you can change what's in you. And that's reconceptualization. So you can change how it plays out into your future. And then it takes another 42 days. And this is crucial for behavior change to happen. You need another 42 days where you've got to practice one of the steps of the neurocycle. It's basically step 5, for about 7 minutes a day, which is not long. And then after 63 days, you've got a habit that's formed. It's automatization. That's the science of what a habit is. Then your behavior will change. But most people will get to, day 1, day 4, day 17, day 14, and then they kind of just stop, because it gets very difficult in that phase. The first 21 days is very, very difficult. But if you push through, within the first few weeks, you start seeing breakthroughs. And then you start, practicing that breakthrough, change that behavior, then you come and start all over again. So for major traumas, you're not going to fix it in one cycle of 63 days. I mean, I've had some patients who've had such severe sexual trauma, it's taken 2-3 years of working daily at their mind, and then kind of building it in. So that's a big picture kind of thing. I don't know if you want to dive into.
I love it. You just completely, that whole example and analogy just goes right into what I want to ask you. It's
Perfect.
So great. People, are having these toxic thoughts and things that they say to themselves. And I know that it's what you're feeding your mind, but it's also what's happening around you, and just all of your experiences rolled into one. But how can we help people to catch and edit their triggers, their thinking, their toxic thoughts that they're having? Because I think, again, the mind controls the body, and whatever you're thinking, it's just so powerful. How can we edit the toxic thoughts?
Excellent question. So these thoughts are creating tremendous imbalance and sort of threatening our, what we call our optimism bias. So we're actually drawn to them. In our mind is, when I say we're talking about mind, because mind is we, it's who you are, it's your mind, your ability to think and feel and choose. That's the sort of psychological definition of mind, your engine, the driving force, all the things I've been saying. So you use your thinking, feeling, and choosing to actually observe what you're doing. So it's called the first kind of the first sort of shift we need to make is that it's called the multiple perspective advantage. We can stand back and observe our own thinking, feeling, and choosing. We can, and that's basically self-regulation, but it's an actual system of it's called an MPA. Get into the MPA, the multiple perspective advantage, where you stand back and observe your own thinking. When you do that, you send a different kind of flow of energy through your brain. So what we have is a messy mind that's at the front line of life, experiencing all these experiences, and that are and building them in as these toxic thoughts. So the messy mind very often makes a mess because it's very experimental, and it's all based on hypotheses, and that's totally okay. It's very normal. We have to have that, because in that messiness we repair, we grow, and learn. So it's a very normal process. The problem is that if we don't pair the messy mind with the wise mind, And the wise mind is this phenomenal ability to stand back, observe our own thinking, evaluate, and say, okay, how is this aligning with survival? Is this aligning with my wired for love mode? Is this good for me? Is this working for me? What is this
Mm,
doing to my emotions and my behaviors and my perspective and my
mhm,
body? And and then in a bigger picture, what's it doing to my life, my work, my relationships, etc.? That ability, we all know we have that, but we need to discipline ourselves to use that. And it's a matter of understanding the sort of phases, because there's so many words, emotions, feelings, and people, there's so many techniques and things that can be very, very confusing for people. So think of it like this. You can, with your wise mind, stand back and say, okay, I am feeling these emotions. And you can actually, let me make this even easier for you. You can, what we have is this ability to stand back and observe our own thinking. So that's the first thing. But there's a few rules when you stand back. And the first rule is be kind. Because as soon as you're kind to yourself, you change your neurophysiology. It becomes more resilient. You change the chemical flow and you change the neurophysiology. You become very accepting and non-judgmental, because everyone battles with anxiety, depression, gossiping, frustration, all of it. We all have versions of it and different degrees of it, different stories. So it's not like you have to think, oh, I've got to hide this. No, own it. Okay. So stand back, observe yourself by recognizing that, hey, this is very much part of being a human. It's okay. Be kind, don't judge yourself. Incredibly important, because if you are so busy hitting on yourself, you're not going to be able to do any fixing, because you're going to get consumed by shame and condemnation. So you want to take
mhm.
that energy, because you
Yes.
have limited energy in the day, and you want to turn that around. It's like, I'm feeling this shame, I'm feeling this guilt, I'm feeling this condemnation, I'm feeling this frustration. That's a helpful messenger. So in this process of the multiple perspective advantage, standing back and observing yourself, watching yourself, you are being kind, you're being gentle, you're being non-judgmental, and you're looking at everything about you as a helpful messenger. As soon as you do that, the research I've done, research that's been done for years now, a study came out of Texas University and the University of Japan just recently. As soon as you do this, as soon as you look at something from a distance as a helpful messenger versus, oh, I'm mentally disturbed, I've got a neuropsychiatric brain disease, I'm mentally ill, there's something wrong with me, I'm falling apart, my life's terrible. If you see that in that way, 1,400 neurophysiological responses will start working against you. In other words, your brain and body will start working against you instead of for you. But if you say, I acknowledge this, I am depressed, I'm anxious, I'm frustrated, I'm irritated, I feel broken, I'm overwhelmed, but that is okay. That is normal. I accept that's part of the messiness in life. See, it's a subtle shift, but it's a massive shift. You're saying the same sentence, but it's different. The one is, oh, it's terrible. The other one, oh, okay, it's bad, but it's normal. It's part of the messiness. So I can handle that. That is part of being a human. It's okay. And that shifts your physiology. So now you become more resilient. So now you're able to, in this mindset, stand back and very, very calmly start looking for, okay, so if this is okay, I'm going to be kind to myself. You then use the you pronoun. Instead of saying, I am doing this, I am depressed or whatever, you say, you are feeling depressed. So it's, in other words, instead of a being, it's a doing. So you're doing, kind of doing the sort of, in the midst of doing, because there's something going on, but you're not being, you can't be depression. Because it's not an it. You can't even have depression because it's not an it. It's the wrong way of describing it. It is simply a warning signal. So you're getting, so the correct terminology to say is, you are experiencing feelings of depression or symptoms of depression or warning signals of depression. This is a helpful messenger. It's telling me something. It's like an alarm. It's telling you, hey, that's okay. Pay attention. It's your non-conscious mind sending, because your non-conscious mind's always trying to bring balance, and it's working with your immune system. And the two, your immune system and your body will send you signals like heart palpitations, adrenaline rushes, flushes in your face, tension in your shoulders. Those are all your body saying, hey, pay attention to me. There's something going wrong. And then the emotions are basically warning signals saying, pay attention, pay attention.
Mhm.
These are helpful messages, dig deep. And then your behaviors, like maybe you're being more withdrawn, or you're more snappy, or you're more irritable, or you like you're getting cognitive blocks, or you've got brain fog, or you very irritable, you're fighting all the time in your behaviors are all, what am I doing? Those are all warning signals. They're not bad things. That you're not a bad person. You're not, it's not you, it's what you're doing because of something. It's what you're saying because of something. It's what you're feeling because of something. And that is okay, because all humans do that. Just you've got to keep telling yourself this, which keeps you calm enough to stand back and say, okay, let me be very objective about this. Let me give myself therapy. Put two chairs together and talk to yourself in the chair and literally tell yourself, okay. And then from there, you start going through the process of the neurocycle, which is the system of, you systematically start gathering and whatever to go through that. Before I dive into that, I don't know if you wanted to ask me any more questions about what I've said before we dive in a little deeper.
So good, so good. I have so many things rolling through my brain. But like, I loved what you said about stepping back and observing, because I think I've learned as I start to get older, observe, don't absorb. Like, when you are sitting back in the observation role, it does make you feel more powerful too. And we have so much more
Totally.
power to create change than we think. And it also takes you out of, when you're in the observation space, it takes you out of the emotional space a little bit.
Well, it brings balance, because every thought that you build, and this is really interesting, it'll help clarify what you're saying there. Your mind is how you think and feel and choose. Those, see, my three fingers are together. Okay, so when you think, you will always feel. You can't take that away. And when you think and feel, you'll choose. So you can't think alone, you can't feel alone, you can't choose alone. The three always work together. So therefore, when you think, feel, and choose about the environments and experiences in the environment, you
Mm-hmm.
are you are thinking, feeling, and choosing and building memories that have got thoughts, feelings, and choices in them. So the source is everything that's coming in. This part over here, sorry, is the think, feel, choose. So this is all the experience, the COVID, the newspaper articles, the experiences you've had, whatever. That's all in the source. But your interpretation is how you think and feel and choose. So these branches have got thoughts, the data and the feelings and the interpretation, the choices you've made, to how you see that. And then the combination then is how you show up. So when you stand back and observe yourself, you are kind of pulling this all apart. You're saying, okay, there's my emotions, there's my behaviors, you gathering awareness. And that's the first step of the neurocycle, is gathering awareness of those in a very organized, systematic way, almost like you picking an apple off a tree. So this was an apple tree, and you're dealing with this toxic thought. If you're picking up, if this is an apple tree, imagine there's these sulfuric apples, these poisonous, whatever analogy you want. The first step, and we're going to talk about the preparation in a moment, is to gather. Gather means I have agency, I have control. I'm not standing under the tree and it's all falling on my head, which is how we feel with life. When because if you think of it, people are feeling so toxic and they've got these thoughts and they're ruminating and overthinking. That's you under the apple tree. It's just too much. It just keeps coming. You don't know what to. So now you stand back. You go into this kindness mode, all the stuff I've described, you mode, etc., and you start looking at this thing differently, and you gather awareness. So you gather one apple, and that first apple is, what are my emotions? What are the emotional warning signals? And it may be depression, anxiety, maybe 2 or 3 apples you pick. And this is day one. You got to do these 5 steps for 21 days, and then you do step 5 for 42 days. So it's a very organized system. And why is it so organized? Because you're rewiring the brain. You're actually pulling apart protein and you're rebuilding other protein branches. So you've got to break down one, transfer the energy from one to the other. It doesn't happen with just one quick fix. There is no quick fix. It doesn't happen with one green
Yeah, I
juice.
think we're always looking for this quick
Yeah,
fix.
exactly. It doesn't happen with
Instant.
one deep breathing exercise, one meditation, one green juice, one workout, and you think you're better. No, not at all. Those are just all playing a support role. All the meditation, the yoga, the breathing, the workouts have to be done, but those are brain preparation. Whereas when you're systematically rewiring, you have to go through a very disciplined process for 15 to 45 minutes each day. And in each and what you do is you sit down deliberately and intentionally and consciously, and you say, okay, I'm going to sit with my neurocycle journal. We've got some that we've got them being designed at the moment. But otherwise, now you can just use any kind of neurocycle journal. You can use my book. I've got to guide you through the process. And then I also have an app called the Neurocycle app. And you're literally going to sit down and start. Okay, I'm sitting down 15 to 45 minutes. I've blocked off the time. I'm going to start. What do I see today? What do I gather today? What emotional warning signal? Depression. What physical warning signal? Heart palpitations. What behavioral warning signal? Uh, very irritable. What perspective? Life is just very tough. So you've got 4 apples in your basket that you've gathered, and they're separate apples that you've put in. You've taken agency over each in this distance. And notice I've said you. I haven't said I. I'm using my wise mind with my messy mind. And then you'd go to the next thing and say, okay, now I'm ready for the next stage. And you sequentially work through, which activates different parts of your brain. Up to this point, with the being kind, standing back, observing your own thinking, non-judgmental, all the things I described prior to the gather step, that set your brain into a different state. So the two sides of your brain would have with this distancing, kindness, non-judgmental, using you, all that stuff would have created a coherence between the two sides of the brain. So as I'm kind to myself, I send through an energy flow that activates the brain waves to flow like the sea, where the big waves out in the depth and then coming closer, they're not as big, and then they build into a crest, and then there's the white crest, and they crash on the beach and they make little ripples and then they go back in again. You want that constant cycling of the brain waves through the left and the right side of the brain. You want lots of blood flow and oxygen at the front of the brain. You want a very nice balance of energy. You want coherence between the two sides of the brain. And you can get all of that in the midst of chaos, in the midst of depression, in the midst of, you can have moments of that. And the neurocycle helps you create those moments in time where your brain doesn't play up. So with your, that's where your messy mind's making a nice big mess. So you're cleaning up the mental mess by making your messy mind work with your wise mind. So you're being introspective. So you're setting it up. And you can, just prior to starting all of this, to really boost that, you can do some deep breathing. And I give you a whole lot of techniques, and there's millions of techniques out there, and some meditation and some whatever you want, havening, tapping, whatever works for you. Maybe do a little bit of a yoga pose or whatever works for you. In the app, I take you through a 2 to 3 minute brain prep before you start the neurocycle.
Oh,
The problem
that's
with just like
perfect.
which is nice. So before, and there's also examples in the book as well. The problem is that with meditation is great, and breathing and havening, but if you just do them alone, all they do is make you aware. And the research shows, and I show some of that in here with my own research, that you'll get even more anxious. So what's happening with meditation, and people don't talk about this enough, is that you bring stuff up, but then now what do I do with what I've just brought up? This is overwhelming. So people shove it down. Problem is, once you're aware of something, and it's now got more strength because you brought it into conscious mind, you add a load of energy onto it, make it stronger, and then you shove it back down. So now you've just made the volcano even stronger. So the volcano is bubbling even
Because you
more.
just stuffed it back in
You
instead of
just stuffed
dealing
it
with
back in.
it.
Exactly. You can't just forget. You have to process. These are all volcanic in nature. They will explode. And so we have to deal with them. And sometimes we deal with them when they've exploded. Sometimes you can catch them before they explode. It's just different, where you at in your life and where you are and when you know these things. So basically, that's that brain preparation. Because your mind is controlling your brain and your body, you want to get your brain into the most resilient state for the hard work, so that your brain doesn't put you in flight, fright, or freeze mode. Because flight and fright, freeze, where your body takes over and you get into a panic that you can't function, those are all very somatic sensations. They're very neurophysiological. And you break that with your mind again, telling yourself to breathe, telling yourself to tap. But those start loosening some of it, but you still got to use your mind again. After that, you've got to go beyond. So the point I'm making is prepare your brain, get it nice and open and resilient, and all the blood flow and all these things I've been saying. And there's lots more detail in the book. In fact, there's a whole table in the book where I explain, when you do step 1, this is happening: your mind, your brain, your body. And it's a simple explanation, but it's the knowledge. As soon as people are empowered with knowledge, your attitude shifts, because you think, hey, okay, when that happens, this is happening. That's great. You feel your attitude shifts, you feel more motivated, then you'll develop the skills to actually carry through. So basically, once you've gathered, you would then go into deep reflection. You would start reflecting, which is step 2. And then reflection is like when you shine a light through a prism, it comes out with a rainbow on the other side. So there's depth. Reflection means depth. It feels like one thing, depression, but what's there? There's a whole lot of reasons behind it. There's a whole narrative. So in other words, you're trying to get to the reflect is trying to take you to the root cause. And reflection also helps you to change the picture, how you're going to see this thing differently. And then you would go to the 3rd and 4th step or right phases. The first writing phase is what I call a metacognitive phase, where you basically, it's a technique I developed years ago, based on the pattern nature of neurons. You literally write trees all over the page, but that forces even more depth, more introspection. It's chaotic. It looks like a big mess, but that's what you want. You just want to get it out. And then the 4th step is writing step is an organizing step. and more stuff happens in your brain and more stuff happens in your body, and you drop homocysteine and you drop inflammation, and all these different things happen, and I track some of it for you in the book. And then the fifth step is kind of a full stop. You can't fix everything today. You can do this, you do 15 to 45 minutes today, then you stop, and then you pick up tomorrow. We have to discipline ourselves to not carry on, because you mentioned one of the questions was, what do you do? These toxic thoughts catch you, and you can get so consumed with these. You could spend your whole day just thinking about this stuff. And then it impacts your work, it impacts your relationships, your day is just terrible. And then tomorrow it feels even worse. And you go to bed feeling awful, and you wake up feeling awful. So you have to be very disciplined with your messy mind. Your wise mind needs to say, okay, messy mind, enough. And active reaches help you do that. An active reach is a statement with a little visual image that is so powerful in facilitating this rewiring, this change, taking energy from here to here. And it's just like a simple statement. Your first active reach on your first day of the 63-day cycle might be something as simple as, I am not depression. Maybe you thought that was your identity. Most people, if they've had a label, they'll think, I am depression, or I am clinically depressed, or this is my lot in life, and or I'm an anxious person and I've got to live with it. Your first active reach might be, that's not the case. It's just a warning signal. It might be, I am not shame. And you may imagine a white rose. It's just hanging. It's a simple statement. So during the day, when your mind wants to go back and start ruminating and overthinking and like feeling even worse about yourself, you say no, and then you grab your active reach, and you, instead of that, you force yourself to think of the active reach, which then brings you to the healing work, and it removes energy from this. Or if energy is never lost. As this thing breaks down, the energy then transfers to this. So either you are using the energy to make this worse, or you're using the energy to weaken this, make this. So that kind of knowledge is very motivating. And knowing that it's hard is because it's very hard to do this rewiring process. You're rewiring not only in the brain, but you're also changing the brain waves, and you in the mind, and you're changing the DNA in the body, right down to the level of the telomeres. So that's why it takes time. And that's but it's very rewarding, because you do feel the difference as you're moving along.
So many things that I really liked in the book. It was just, I mean, your book is really phenomenal. And I
Thank
had a
you.
major like epiphany when I was reading it about perfectionism, because my mother suffered from depression. It was quite serious. And I look back and realize how much of her anxiety and depression was linked to perfectionism and
Mm.
comparison. And what are some tips for people that maybe suffer from a little bit of that? Because I think it's this not enoughness, and they're getting this anxiety.
Absolutely, that's a great question. Perfectionism, is like, you can almost take a tree like this and call it perfectionism. And then you need to start by saying, okay, perfectionism is one of the signals, but what does it make me feel? So you've got to be and you need to be the thought detective. So and work through the process of the neurocycle. As you go through the process, you're going to start finding your origins, until you find the origin of that perfectionism, which may be that your mom grew up. I don't know anything about your mom, but I'm just going to throw out a
My
guess there.
grandmother was a teacher.
Okay, your grandmother teacher, maybe she always was very hard on your mom, and nothing was good enough, and your mom had to prove herself. And it may be completely unintentional on the part of her mother,
Oh, of course.
but it just comes, it's how you interpret it. So you feel like you always have to prove yourself. So that means you've got to do everything so well. So you're so hard on yourself that you then, very often it is that pattern. These patterns pass through the DNA, and they become epigenetic factors. So very often you can see these kind of patterns passing through generations as an epigenetic factor. But that doesn't mean that you have to be like that. It just means that there's a vulnerability or a propensity, but you can change and break that. So perfectionism has a root. It has many, many roots, but generally it's something that's made you feel bad about yourself, and you have to prove yourself. There's something that you just have to, like, if you don't always have your house perfectly clean, you're a bad person, or you're a bad housewife, or you're a bad mother, or you are it reflects a messy mind, or I don't know. Who knows, when a child is growing up, and we're so impressionable, we forming our I factors very shaped around these things that we're exposed to, and they can be so distorted. I mean, I remember one of my patients who, at the age of 4, she was one of 4 kids, and she had 3 brothers, and her came from a very religious family, and the boys were very like worshipped, and she was kind of, you the girl, you just, in the house, and you clean and you cook, and the woman played a very minor role kind of thing, and it was very bad in that house. And this at 4, she was sitting in a with her brothers at a restaurant, and some friend came up and said, what a lovely little boy. She was trying to be like her brother, so she used to intentionally dress like a boy and develop boy mannerisms. And that day, her whole identity was completely, had already been shattered, but it completely was like shattered. From that day on, she became like years and years of and perfectionism was one of the things, swung from perfectionism to this to that, and it destroyed. So I'm just giving you that as a 4-year-old, that environment and that statement from that person, I'm a girl, oh nice boy, girls are bad, and everything about her femaleness she hated. And it destroyed her until a young woman took her in her 30s before she actually managed to work out that route and face what it was and do the work of reconstructing and recognizing, okay, that's what happened to me, but then it doesn't have to be what stays in me. This is what happens to you. And so that perfectionism is one of those things that will manifest in a multitude, but generally it's attacked to identity. Perfectionism is so closely related to who you are as a person, and your value is not going to be recognized unless you do something or you be something, prove something else or something like that.
Oh, I love that so much. And I just think that reading your book and listening to you talk about that makes you realize that you can dissect the things that have happened and make changes. And if it was a negative experience, we can always learn to, like, I think understanding and having awareness of what has happened and why you're having these symptoms goes a long way to helping you restore to a more positive balance.
Absolutely. And balance is key there, because your whole survival is about balance. We often hear that and it's such a terrible thing, as they keep saying in the media, that we have a negativity bias, that we're drawn to the negative as humans. And that it's just not accurate at all. If you look at the way we physically made the brain and body, and you look at the whole mind brain body link, it's actually an optimism bias. So in other words, everything is for survival. So if you think of it like this, if you have something, a bacteria in your body, COVID virus or a trauma, that doesn't help you grow. It actually destroys you. So what is your brain and body going to do? It's going to fight that so you can survive. So the optimism bias is actually our modus operandi. It is going to the negative to fix it, not draw to the negative because of the negativity. It's drawn to the negativity to restore balance. And it's that whole, there's the mess, let me repair, let me grow. But we're not allowing ourselves to be in the mess. The whole mental health narrative is stigmatizing. It's, if you've got mental health issues, you're crazy. Meanwhile, there's not a person on this planet who doesn't have mental health issues. It's since the beginning of time, we're all battling, but we pretend. Only 3% of leaders talk about mental health. And that's terrible. That means that, it's not, and I'm talking about leaders in industry, across industry, influencers, etc., etc. And it's much better now. People are speaking about it much more, but still in a way that is not allowing people to be comfortable enough to express and be authentic about owning and processing, because you can't just be aware, you have to process through as well.
Oh my gosh. And just being a daughter of somebody that grew up in the industry of not, of labeling, of shock treatments, of so many things. I so relate to what you're saying right now about how we need to kind of make major changes in the mental health industry. And I just want to thank you so much. You made, I think, sometimes a difficult topic so easy to grasp. And I just, you're so knowledgeable. It just makes a person lean in and want to listen to more. And
Oh,
where
that's
can
so
they
kind.
get that?
Thank
Like your
you.
podcast and your books and everything, so people can get more of you today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really kind of you. I appreciate that. I think if people can just really get get the inside knowledge that, hey, I can do this, and I'm not the only one, and we do it together because we're so good together. We enhance each other. And if we're all helping, think of it like this. Maybe this is a good way of summarizing. If you go to a dinner, going out for dinner with your friends, and it's a group of friends that you've known for a while, and you sit down, you say, hey guys, I've got this neuropsychiatric brain disease, and I've been diagnosed with psychotic depression and this and that, and I've got to go on all these medications. Everyone's going to treat you differently. But same scenario, out for dinner with your friends, instead of saying all that, you say, hey guys, I've had such a bad few months. I've really battled. It's made me feel so flat. I feel like this and this has happened. And immediately people will lean in and say, oh, I can relate. I've had the same thing. I felt like that. And this is
Mhm.
my story. And that was my experience. You'll share, you'll support, you'll lift each other up. And in the process, you aren't going to transmit weird behaviors. You're actually just going to share your story. And in that way, the narrative is shared and you can negotiate and support each other through helping. So the one isolates, the other one supports. It doesn't mean that it's going to go away, but that you be a lot more able to deal with stuff when we can support versus just, get those scary labels.
You just did the sisterhood of sweat in a nutshell, and
Oh,
that's
good.
that's what I wanted to create, which is what you were
Beautiful.
describing with the support and the help and the hearing and being seen. So
I love that.
thank
I
you
love
so
that.
much. And coming on Memorial Day, spending your time with the audience, we
Of
really
course.
want to thank you. Thank you
My
so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of the Sisterhood of Sweat.